Welcome back to the First Team College Football Recruiting Show. Joe DeLeone, Ryan Roberts, Matt Sims. Today, we've got updates regarding the coaching carousel. It's also Super Bowl week. We're going to be talking a little bit about that at the end, but we want to really dive deep on some of the biggest news surrounding coordinator searches. Guys, I got to say, for this offseason, it has to be one of the most dramatic offensive and defensive coordinating hires because of one particular reason, is that the University of Alabama has had some restructuring at those particular positions. It's never often, I don't even know if this has even ever happened, that they have been looking to fill the offensive and defensive coordinator positions at the same time. Now, they hired two individuals from two other programs, that being Tommy Rees, the Notre Dame offensive coordinator, to take over for the Alabama Crimson Tide, leading their offense. And then at defense, they hired Kevin Steele from the University of Miami. Guys, I want to dive in first on the more polarizing name amongst this coordinator reshuffle for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Tommy Rees, man, as soon as things popped up, it was already quite dramatic because Tommy Rees, as we know, was formerly the starting quarterback at Notre Dame, worked his way up under Brian Kelly. Now he's leaving his alma mater to a situation where he will be coaching under Nick Saban. So, Ryan, I want to throw this to you first really quick here because we know your connections to Notre Dame, being someone who covers the program. Do you think that Tommy Rees can get the job done here? And I phrase this in the sense where it felt like a lot of Notre Dame fans were hoping that he might not even be back at the end of this season, and now he goes and gets hired away by Nick Saban.
I think that Tommy Rees is a very polarizing offensive coordinator, to be honest, because I do look, this is my general opinion. He's a 31-year-old coach, right? So he's not at his pinnacle. He's not at the precipice of how good he's going to be. There's still a lot for him to learn. And I do think that there's a lot of times over the last 2 years that you do see some really good moments, right? I mean, like I think about North Carolina this year, South Carolina this year, the Clemson game. Last year in 2021 with Jack Cohn, the last 6 games of the season, I mean, Jack Cohn was ripping it up, and I give a lot of that credit to Tommy
Jack
Rees.
Cohen. No, I'm kidding.
Well, yes, undrafted free agent Jack Cohn, yes.
Yeah.
But I think Tommy did a really good job with Jack down the course of that season. I think that he had flashes of really good stuff this year, but he's maddeningly inconsistent from a play calling perspective. He is. You'll have those great games, and then you'll have Marshall and Stanford kind of mixed in, right? Where you're just like, that was a clunker of a game plan. It was. But offensive coordinator is also much more than just calling a football game, right? It's the game planning during the week. It's the practice plans. It's the recruiting. And I think that a lot of parts of Tommy Rees are very promising. You know, I think he's done a really good job recruiting over the last couple of years, not only just the quarterback position with Kenny Minchie and now CJ Carr in 2024, but also he was a main recruiter for guys like Billy Shrout, who's probably going to be starting offensive guard, who was a top 100 kid coming out, some of the wide receivers that are a part of the Notre Dame program now. Tommy Rees had a big hand in a lot of the offensive recruits that are now a part of the Notre Dame program. So I think he's a good recruiter. I think he has promise as an offensive play caller. But the reality still sits here, Joe, is that can Tommy Rees get a lot better? Does he have upside? Yeah, he does. Can Notre Dame still upgrade at the offensive coordinator position? Yeah, they still can, right? Like it doesn't always have to be one side or the other. Can he get it done in Alabama? I think he can because he has a lot of talent to work with, right? And we've seen some other offensive coordinators. I mean, you know, Steve Sarkisian was fantastic, right? Lane Kiffin had his big moments. But Bill O'Brien didn't do a very good job, and he still had one of the better offenses in college football in 2021. So can he get it done? I think he can, but I do think that there's a maturation that still needs to happen with Tommy because he needs to be a more consistent offensive coordinator. I don't think anybody can argue against that.
Matt, what do you think? Do you think that this move makes sense for Nick Saban to go after Tommy Rees as his offensive coordinator?
Well, Ryan makes a great point, too, of the fact of, you know, Tommy being successful so far in his young career as a recruiter. You know, Coach O'Brien, I mean, let's face it, he's past that point of wanting to go out on the road and entice a young man to go to a school there and, you know, do the old schmoozing aspect of his career. And he actually is one of the guys that, you know, surprisingly inherited one of the worst athletic offenses that Alabama's had in a really long time. Steve Sarkisian, I mean, absolutely did a phenomenal job. What was great for Steve was that he actually inherited the offensive coordinator position in Atlanta and was able to learn the offense through Matt Ryan that Matt Ryan learned through Kyle Shanahan, and was able to take those things and apply them to the college level, which the college level has not ever seen before. That type of thought and intellect into how to dissect a defense. Bill O'Brien, a little bit more of an old school type of thought process, a little bit more just like, being, a mature professional football player, which of course Nick Saban loves. But I think going forward for Tommy Rees, this is a great way for him to be around the guru that's on top of the mountain. I mean, let's face it. I don't really care who the offensive coordinator or defensive coordinators are at Alabama. At the end of the day, you are bowing down to the king on top of the mountain, who is Nick Saban. And in Nick Saban, we trust. So yes. I think he is going to be someone that is going to learn a lot from Nick Saban on how to carry himself as a man, as a leader, how to build a program, how to think beyond the X's and O's and about the Johnnies and Joes at times. So I think for him in his career, this is going to be a very monumental moment for his transition into being a face of a franchise going forward.
And Joe, can I say this as well?
Yeah.
Because Tommy Rees, the end-all be-all, and everybody knows this, is that he wants to be an NFL coach, right? He wants to be an NFL offensive coordinator, maybe a head coach down the line. That's his dream. And I think when you look at what Alabama's done for their offensive coordinators in recent years, that's the track, right? I mean, that's it. You talked about Bill O'Brien, now the offensive coordinator at New England. You talk about Lane Kiffin, head coach at Ole Miss, Steve Sarkisian, head coach at Texas, Mike Locksley, head coach at Maryland. Offensive coordinators at Alabama usually have a great track to getting higher level jobs, head coaching jobs, or they get to the NFL. So Tommy Rees is betting on that. And again, I think that Matt makes a great point. Tommy's only 31 years old, right? There's a lot of maturing that needs to happen, but who better to mature under than Nick Saban? I mean, he has that proven track record. And the one thing about Tommy that I've always talked about is that he is a little hard-headed at times. He is. And good luck trying to be hard-headed against Nick Saban. I don't think that's going to work out too well for you, right? And I think that he's going to have to change some of his mannerisms a little bit. He's going to have to change how he talks to players at times. I think he's going to have to change just how he kind of formulates everything from an offensive coordinator perspective. But I think that is a great opportunity for him to grow and then get to the level that he wants to get to.
Well, I think he's going to have to make a total 180 shift, because we look at what he was at the University of Notre Dame. Not only was he the offensive coordinator, but he's a guy who lived through being a Notre Dame player. So his word is going to hold a lot more weight than I think any other coach on the staff, because he knows what that experience is like. He's stepping into a situation where he is not familiar with the area he is stepping into coach at. I will say this. I do agree with you guys that he gets a lot more protection coaching under Nick Saban. And I think that this is a smart move on his part, considering, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people were not very big fans at the University of Notre Dame of what Tommy Rees was doing. And we talked about those frustrations. Look, it is going to help for his coaching career. And I don't know how long this is going to last, but I got to be completely honest. I do not know if I believe that this is going to be immediate or consistent success. And my main reasoning is knowing all of the talented and bright minds coaching at other programs that he now has to go up against. And I'm not saying that Tommy Rees has not been tested at the University of Notre Dame. They do still play tough schedules, and I give him a lot of credit for the way that they played against Clemson. I know that wasn't like a perfectly called game, but he still did enough to help win that football game. But knowing how he's faced off against some of these SEC teams, I look at a couple of years ago when they faced off with Alabama in the college football playoff, and they got dominated. They couldn't move the ball, and they got completely outcoached. Is Tommy going to take that next step under Nick Saban in a different spot when he has already shown some struggles as a play caller to step up in those situations? Because it is going to be a week-to-week basis of facing the top minds in college football, having to go up against like guys like Matt House, having to go up against guys like Kirby Smart. It is going to be an uphill battle if he can't make those adjustments.
Well, the one thing that you have to keep in mind too is that he has a whole new library and archive of just the history of football and success for the past decade that he can go back into and now truly understand. You know, he can ask Nick Saban, What was Steve thinking when he called this play for this specific situation? What was the theory behind this? How did you go about game planning and building this game plan this way? How did Coach O'Brien do it this way? Right. And it's a really easy way for you to educate yourself on it. He's not going to do a complete 180. He is who he is to some extent. What I think he really needs to do is he just needs to obviously just try to do his best to be remolded, reshaped into the way that he views the game and himself to others. Notre Dame was a great shield for him in a lot of ways. He could act and do whatever he pleased in certain ways because he is part of the legend of Notre Dame football. Well, guys at Alabama won't really give two damns about how he did at Notre Dame because Alabama looks down at a school like Notre Dame. And they think, well, they're below us. They're beneath us. We don't care about your success there. You know, if he was an Alabama quarterback, there would be that same level of respect. So he's removing himself from that veil of Notre Dame. He is now just going to be another worker bee underneath the Nick Saban tree. And now for him, go to work, do your homework, research the things that have been successful in the past, right, that they've done extremely well, and now try to create your own way of doing those same things and finding a little bit more, like as corny as it sounds, your voice and identity as a coach away from Notre Dame.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I think there was a lot of offensive shortcomings because, I mean, honestly, and I'll put it like this, Tommy Rees probably shouldn't have gotten the job in 2019, right? I mean, he probably should have. He probably wasn't ready at the time because at the time he was a 28-year-old offensive coordinator, right? Like, I think that he was put into not an easy situation. And Joe, you talk about like 2020 Alabama, and there's been shortcomings, of course, but I think that there was a improvement this year as far as in the big games.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about the win against Clemson. You talk about, I mean, the offense was sharp against USC. It was just, couldn't stop USC offensively. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Ohio State wasn't great the first game of the season, but I do think that there was still a lot of promise. And I mean, to Matt's point, right? Like, you were going to be assimilating below the greatest coach in this era,
right,
from a college perspective. The 2020 version of Tommy Rees as a 28-year-old offensive coordinator was under Brian Kelly. All due respect to Brian Kelly, he's not Nick Saban, right? Marcus Freeman is not Nick Saban at this point. Like, they're not those guys. Nick Saban, I think, is going to bring the best out of him. And Nick Saban is also one of those guys where if things aren't running the right way, he's going to tell you, and he's going to put his foot down, and he's going to make some changes. And
it's a great point, Ryan, because the age difference, I think, is somewhat important too. I mean, you know, Tommy Rees and Marcus are a little bit closer in age, you know, somewhat of the same generation, and you know, maybe that, you know, ego of being, well, he's a head coach now, I could be that too. Now with Nick Saban, there's no doubt he is, you know, the king on the castle. And, you know, you do have to be subservient to at least his overall view and opinion of what he thinks is best for the team. And I think that is going to be very invaluable for him going forward.
I also think Nick Saban deliberately, I mean, I might be thinking a little bit too far here, but I think that Nick Saban deliberately went after a guy like Tommy Rees with other options on the table, knowing that he's younger, he's somebody that he can mold. In the past few coaches that he's worked with, Steve Sarkisian, Lane Kiffin, Bill O'Brien, are experienced guys, as we've talked about. It is a lot harder for a guy like Nick Saban to have to assume ultimate control of the play calling, the decision making on offense when they've got all that experience. And I think that this now gives Nick Saban an opportunity to quite literally directly mold Tommy Rees as a play caller and this offense. He's not going to, like, we're all agreeing here, Tommy Rees doesn't have a leg to push back on with what Nick Saban asks of him. And I think that there's positives of trying to translate to what Nick Saban values in what Tommy Rees was calling, which was a very heavy run-oriented offense. And I think that we're going to get that transition back to that style of offense that we saw in the early 2010s with the Trent Richardsons, with the Mark Ingrams, with the Eddie Lacy's. I think we're going to start getting a lot more of that, knowing what Tommy Rees likes to do and what Nick in the past with different offensive coordinators has liked to call.
And Nick definitely has a habit too of finding these offensive coordinators that have a little attitude and you know, stuff to them, which I think is a credit to him. He does seem to attract a certain type of polarizing character. I mean, hey, Lane Kiffin, polarizing. Tommy Rees, polarizing. Bill O'Brien, I mean, talk to the Houston Texan fans, polarizing. So he does have a way of, helping these guys rejuvenate their career when they've been kind of kicked down by their certain fan bases that they came from.
Well, Joe, it's a great point because I do think that the NFL, I think that the game of football is very cyclical in a lot of ways, right? It's like Alabama goes from that tough, style of brand of football to more of a wide open approach under the Tuas and the Jared Judys and Jalen Waddles. And then Georgia comes and they play the big boy brand of football that Alabama used to, and they kind of punch him in the mouth a little bit. And I think that you're coming now back to the other side of why do you want a Tommy Rees? It's because Tommy Rees in 2 of the last 3 years when they've had a good offensive line has shown that he wants to run the football. He does, man. He wants to run the football at a high clip. I mean, you were at over 200-something yards 3 years ago. You weren't great running the football in 2021, and then you ran for right around 200-plus again this season. So they want to run the football. And I also think that naturally when programs and organizations want to make a coaching hire, when the previous regime did not work out the best possible way they wanted to. So like Bill O'Brien wasn't a massive success in Alabama, right? Especially this last year. And I think there was kind of a mutual parting that happened there. The impulse is to overcorrect to the other side, right? You just went with the older veteran offensive coordinator that he's stuck in his ways. Bill O'Brien's way is Bill O'Brien's way. Now let's go with the young guy that has potential, has upside, and might be more willing to potentially assimilate to my style and the way it branded football that I want to play as well. Right. So I think it is a bit of an overcorrection. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that because we said on the NFL level, when you have I think of like Minnesota, right? When they had Mike Zimmer, it's like an old defensive coach who was a really good defensive mind. Yeah. It started getting stale at the end. Let's go with Kevin O'Connell, who's the complete opposite of what Mike Zimmer is, right? That's how the overcorrection works for me.
So the other funny thing too about this now is the guy he hired as his defensive coordinator is the complete opposite of Tommy Rees, where he is, and it's the complete opposite of Pete Golding as well, where Kevin Steele is this much older defensive coordinator who's been around the block. He has been at a lot of different schools, a lot of different SEC schools. He comes from Miami. He previously was the defensive coordinator at Auburn, where for multiple years, except for I think it was his last year, he was finishing in the top 15 to 20 range of defenses in total yards in the country. Very, very bright defensive mind. I have to admit, it seems like the temperature for excitement on the Kevin Steele hiring is not as high as the Tommy Rees one. It seems like Alabama fans are thinking like Nick Saban knows what he's doing. We got to trust him. This is a guy that we can work and build up. But for whatever reason, people think that Kevin Steele is a walkover, like he's like a failure. I don't agree with that. I think that he's got a relatively pretty proven track record. And while last year Miami's defense wasn't great, he didn't have as much to work with. Ryan, you're giving me a face here. You don't agree with me?
I think the majority of Kevin Steele's coaching career has been pretty underwhelming, to be honest. He's a great recruiter. There's no doubt. Yeah. Kevin Steele's going to get some talent in the room. But I think when you look at what he did at LSU that 1 year that he was there, in between 2 fantastic defensive years, he gave up like 24 points a game. You talk about what he did last year in his most previous stint. I think Kevin Steele is the exact opposite of Tom Rees in the sense that you know exactly who Tommy Steele is, and I think he's a very average defensive coordinator who's a great recruiter. That's what I think.
Tommy Steele? Yeah, you're mixing them up now. Yeah, you're making a conglomerate now. The evolution of them. In this situation with Kevin Steele, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's familiarity. It's a great recruiter, like Ryan said. Nick Saban has coached with him on 2 other occasions. 3 out of those 4 years where they coached together, that they were a top 12 defense when they were together. And sometimes when you're talking about the offense and defensive side of the football, it's more so how the group itself works together rather than the one person getting all the credit. When you go back to the Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl run the first time around, Doug Peterson, he had Frank Reich on the team, and those 2 guys did a great job of working together to create a beautiful offense, right? No matter who the quarterback was, Carson Wentz or Nick Foles, and it worked, right? In this situation, you got Kevin Steele, you got Nick Saban. Nick Saban is heavy with the defensive side of the football, and those 2 minds together, I think, will be able to, use their intellect and their expertise to get the most out of their players and be, again, just an extremely detailed football team, the way that Nick wants to be on that side of the football, added with their great recruiting class that they have this year.
Yeah, see, I don't think we're on the same page though. In general, though,
We're
Ryan.
not.
I'm
We're not.
I'm surprised that you're not that big of a fan or not so much. I'm not surprised, but I think we're very far off in terms of our perspective of him. Here's my one thing, Ryan.
I just think that there were other options that have much higher upside than Kevin Steele. That's all.
Like who else would you have hired in all seriousness?
Jim Leonard's still out there, man. I would have
Okay, that
given Jim
one
Leonard a serious call.
This is the second time that I've done that this week, where I'm like, who else would you have hired? And then my co-host has said Jim Leonard. See, I will give you that one.
He would have been interesting for sure.
But instead, we go with Kevin Steele. Look, I don't think it's as bad, though, as it seems. Last year, I think we can agree here that Miami defense that he was coaching last year was pretty devoid of talent. There are some players on it. There's some quality players that they have on that unit. But with what that roster was dealing with, what that team was dealing with in a transition period, it was a bit of an uphill battle. To finish 68th in the country, I think it's more of an accomplishment than it is a weak season.
I don't know. When you say 68th out of 130 teams, that doesn't sound great. 131.
He's working with scraps.
Again, we in this situation, though, we know at the end of the day, yes, he holds the title of DC. When you're with Nick Saban, everybody knows who really the defensive coordinator is. Now, he might not be calling the plays, but you know that he's overseeing that more so than any other phase of the game. And it's just like with anything going head coach, they have an OC, but you know that he's the guy that really has his hands on the reins, and he's the one that's controlling how they go about the game plan and taking apart an offense. And that's where I think this is a match made in heaven, really, for Nick Saban, because he's got a guy that he trusts, that he's worked with, that he knows has gained experience outside of his bubble. He's going to come back with other lessons that he's learned. Nick's going to share his knowledge that he's learned without him from the other guys. And that amalgamation of all this information, I think, will pour out into a better product than what we've seen.
I think it was a brilliant job by Mario Cristobal, because he got two not great coaches that are great recruiters, and Josh Gaddis and Kevin Steele got a lot of talent in here. Now you get to hire some good coaches. So I think it's a fantastic idea.
I never would have thought that Mario Cristobal would be getting a pat on the back for the season.
But we're patting Kevin Steele for the season.
Yeah, right. Joe. I know.
Come on, man.
You walked into that one too.
I think that falls. I don't know. We agree to disagree, because I think that falls a little more on the head coach for the roster that's on the field. But I understand where you're coming from, though. I understand where you're coming from.
Next subject. All right.
Next subject. Before we transition to talking about Brian Ferentz, which is a hilarious topic to dive into, one that I think that we're all going to agree on. If we were to grade just simply the hirings of both these positions, how would we grade them on a scale of A to F? Ryan, what do you think?
We actually talked about this on another podcast. I would give them like a C. I mean, because I don't think it's terrible. Like, it's not like a failing grade.
As a whole, or each as an individual?
As a whole. A whole. I would give Kevin Steele like a C, and then Tommy Rees a C plus. So it would just be right there in the C range. I think there's upside to Tommy Rees. Maybe I would go to B minus, but it's still not the first choice that I would have made personally. I think Kevin Steele is just blah, man. Like, he's fine. Is he an upgrade?
He's
maybe. Like, it's fine.
Killing me over here, Ryan. You're killing me. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a B minus for the entire group. And really, the fact is I trust in Nick Saban. I trust in Nick Saban. I trust in the fact that he is the ace up the sleeve in this situation. You could have taken any offensive, defensive coordinator. You put Nick Saban in the room. And I think that at the end of the day, it not only is a great coach of players, but he's a great coach of coaches. And that's definitely one of his most proven track records of his career. And that's why I give it a B minus, because if he sees something in these two gentlemen, that means a lot to me. That's a huge feather in both of their caps to get that seal of approval from him.
I'm going to go with the C plus here, right in between where you guys are. And I agree with you. What do you give me that face for? A C plus?
You just argued me for 7 minutes about how Kevin Steele was this great hire, and then you give it a C plus.
No. You're misinterpreting what I'm saying, right? I'm not saying it's like, oh, it's an A plus hire, but I feel like everyone's making it seem like it was a failure. That's my point. I think that
it's
right.
Yeah. It just doesn't have the same amount of hype around it, because he's not a fancy name anymore. and neon lights, right? And that's why.
That was my point that I was getting to, is that just it seemed like overall, and like kind of with what you were saying, Ryan, is that it was an underwhelming hire. I think that it's fine. It's going to get the job done. It's not like it's a total drop off from Pete Golding. It's not like they're going to completely bottom out. But here's my reasoning why I'm giving him a C+ for both
Ryan.
these guys, is that they're fine hires. They're fine hires. And I don't really think that this gets them back to winning at the SEC. I don't think it gets them back to that point.
All right.
That's where I
Joe, just let it go. We'll talk about it again here in a few weeks.
I'm sure we will. We'll be talking
you got me crying about this.
All right, let's talk about Brian Ferentz, who I think Iowa fans are crying about him getting his.
Well, Matt's going to be crying because he hates bad offense. So.
Oh my God. When I was going through the statistics, though, of this year for Iowa, right after we discussed this as being part of the show today, I was like, man, I should probably get off the show and get into coaching myself.
So see, Matt hates bad offense, but I look at this.
I hate bad football. I hate bad football.
Bad football, but great defense wins games for Iowa. But look, Brian Ferentz, the son of Kirk Ferentz, who's the head coach at Iowa, received, I guess, what is considered to be an extension, but an adjustment on his contract where he is receiving a $50,000 drop in his pay. He's making $850,000 next year.
It's so funny.
Ludicrous that this man is being paid this much money to produce 18 points per game. Now, there is a stipulation in the contract where they need to win more football games, and they also need to average over 25 points per game. Fun little tidbit here, 25 points per game. It does not specify if defensive touchdowns count towards that total. So they had 6 last year.
Awesome.
And so now Kirk can bail out his son potentially with some defensive touchdowns. Look, guys, I think that we can agree here. I kind of want to take the angle here of talking about the nepotism impact. Like, I just don't fully understand how after things went down last year and what we know about Brian Ferentz, I'm sure that he's a fine coach. I'm sure that he has learned a lot from his dad, and I'm sure that he has earned the opportunity to be a part of a Power 5 coaching staff. But I think at a certain point, when you don't produce results and they have the issues that they have, you have to reconsider restructuring the situation, the coaching staff. Somebody else should be calling plays instead of doing this. And this might actually inevitably be the downfall of Kirk Ferentz, who has been a long-time great head coach. Matt, let's kick it to you first on this one. What do you think about the move of him getting a little bit of extra room?
The whole reconstructing of the contract to me is a little hilarious, just because the fact that he is getting paid just under $1 million. They took away $50,000, like you said. I mean, it's just like, it's not really that big of a slap on the wrist, to me, but, for at least a way to motivate him to do his job. He should be motivated himself internally for just the product that was put out in the field last year. It shouldn't really matter what the dollars and cents are or be incentivized in your contract to perform well. That's not what this game is about, right? For him personally, one, I am concerned for Kirk Ferentz because I am a huge fan of him. I think he is a really good dude. I think he is a guy that has earned it the hard way and the right way and has done a great job of keeping an Iowa program extremely relevant in a day and age where it's very tough to do that with where they're located geographically and who they're competing against now with this NIL world. But for his son, Brian, the whole assignment this offseason is get out on the road, go talk to some of these really, really educated NFL offensive minds out there, go down to Miami and go hang out with Mike McDaniel for a few weeks. Go out there to San Francisco and hang out with Kyle Shanahan for a week. Go to Minnesota and hang out with Coach O'Connell for a few weeks. Learn the game of football from a different vantage point. Try to apply some of these lessons that you learned from them. Because, the thing is about these teams, they run the ball pretty well, considering the fact of how effective they are passing the ball aggressively down the field. So find new ways to just add more tools to your toolbox, more tools to your bat belt so you can be a more effective coach going forward. Because what he's doing is not working. So he has to find ways to be creative and to get more out of this offensive skill unit as a whole going forward. You got a veteran quarterback coming in too as a transfer. So that's great. You can lean on him more to learn more and to learn something new. But you have to go out there and you kind of have to reshape the way that you look at the game and how you attack defenses.
I can't believe that we're in a situation where there's a Big Ten football team, a Power 5 football team, that stipulation in your contract say that you have to score 25 points a game and you get a little buffer if you get to 7 wins.
Right.
Like guys, 25 points a game in college football is nothing. That's like a good NFL offense.
Well, in the Big Ten, it's a lot,
Oh, man. Matt, I watched a game last year. I know Joe watched this game as well, where they beat South Dakota State, who is a great football team on the FCS level, FCS National Championship.
Yeah.
They beat them 7-3, in which the 7 was not a touchdown. Think about that.
Yeah.
It was awful, man. It's just absolutely terrible.
Well, even the way that they beat Rutgers was fascinating too.
Safeties. It was a field goal and 2 safeties last year. It's just
their win versus Rutgers was a great example of that too. I mean, that game is essentially tied unless it was an interception return for a touchdown. So that was the same way.
Yeah. And Iowa is, again, their offensive firepower is not incredibly impressive. So I'm not sitting here saying that they need to average 40 points a game. That's unrealistic.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's unrealistic. But a better offense combined with that defense is a dang tough team to beat in the Big Ten, man. It's
Definitely
really tough with how good that defense is.
Right.
25 points a game, that's unacceptable, man. It's unacceptable for anyone. And when you add in the fact that it's his coach's son, that the nepotism comes into the conversation, right, Joe?
But that's the kicker.
It's a tough situation because Iowa's offensive line last year was one of the worst that I can remember at the University of Iowa. It was a bad offensive line. Their quarterback play was atrocious. Like Matt said, you have Cade McNamara coming in who should have a semblance of consistency, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
You have Marco Linez coming in as a freshman quarterback that I think is a really talented football player. So the quarterback room is going to get better. So there can't be excuses about, because Iowa wasn't even good at running the football last year. And that's historically what they've been really good at, right? It has to get better. It can't stay this path because at the end of the day, Kirk Ferentz has done incredible things in Iowa. He's a great coach, in my opinion, right? There's a cap on how good you can be at Iowa, in my personal opinion. I think he's done a tremendous job.
Yeah.
But this is not the standard of Iowa football. It can't be in order for them to continue to get better.
Yeah.
And Matt, one of the things you said, I totally agree with, where he needs to go and seek out picking the minds of some bright individuals
Definitely
at the NFL level and even at the college level. But they have limitations with who they can recruit. Iowa is not going to get the best athletes. And we see that on the roster. It's a lot of really big, strong, hard-nosed kids. And we know the history of them having good fullbacks and good tight ends. You got to find the people that you can pull from that run the ball effectively and learn from them. Guys like Mike Denbrock, can you pull from their offensive play scheme and run the ball more effectively is key for the future of this Iowa team. I bring this up where I actually endured and was a part of a team where this exact situation happened. When I was at the University of Rhode Island and I was playing a few years ago. Our offensive coordinator was our head coach's son, who was a defensive-minded head coach, was the defensive coordinator at UCF when Blake Bortles was there, when we hired him, and his son, Will Fleming, was the offensive coordinator. And we struggled a lot on offense. We barely could keep up on offense every single year that he was the offensive coordinator. And while Will Fleming was a great guy and was a good coach, he just was not a fit calling plays yet because he was a really young guy. He was in his early 30s, and it was an uphill battle for him to be prepared to go up against good CAA teams like Maine, like James Madison, like UNH on a week-to-week basis. They ended up letting him go, and they went and hired one of the best offensive coordinators in the country at the FCS level from Holy Cross, and it was a total 180. They were one of the best offenses in the country the following few years in the most recent years. Look, I think that is enough proof that you can't let something like this impact your decision-making. I know that Kirk Ferentz has been coaching long enough that he has the connections at probably all over the country with his big coaching tree that he should set up Brian to go coach somewhere else at another program, learn from a situation where he's not protected by his father. And I think Brian should want that as well to then earn an opportunity when he's ready to be an offensive coordinator again.
Well, they might not have a choice after this year. So that's why I say that to Brian, where just go out there, get on the road, be eager and hungry to learn as much as you possibly can from people that you trust. And honestly, just, let your ego go a little bit. There's guys out there that can teach you a lot of really good football stuff. and, just let them tap into some of that stuff that you haven't even realized you have yet. That's what he's really got to do. He's got to go out there and he's just got to be a wet sponge and just a dry sponge and absorb as much as he possibly can from all these other guys out there that are super talented. Because you don't want to see this happen to a guy that we know is a great molder of men, in this game of football, which, for Iowa, I don't know if you can get a better guy for your particular program going forward. That can be that selfless in a lot of ways. So it's really an interesting dynamic right now for Iowa.
And Kirk Ferentz is 67 years old, right?
Right.
So, and unfortunately, he has 198 wins in his 23 years or whatever it is at Iowa. He's been incredibly impressive as the head coach. But people mostly remember what you did for me last, right? How did it end? And I don't want it to end like that for Kirk Ferentz because I want to celebrate him for being one of the better coaches of our generation. That's what he was for me. And he was a semblance of consistency. And you talked about the molding of men, Matt. Like he's done that with a lot of great players over the years. I want to remember him for the best parts of Kirk Ferentz. I don't remember him. I don't want to remember him for maybe him being a little hard-headed to mass change or to at least elicit change from the offensive coordinator position. So I hope they get it turned around and he ends his career the way that Kirk Ferentz should, because was a great coach, man. He really was. And I want him to be remembered for that.
Right.
Yeah, and hopefully things do get cleaned up here. And it almost does feel like he was trying to set up his son to be the next head coach at Iowa, and that might not end up playing out. We're going to pay attention to this because it's just such an odd storyline, a very unique one. Guys, we've got the Super Bowl coming up this Sunday, so figured it'd be a good time to share some picks, who we think is going to win the game. I know that there's some interesting takes out there on Jalen Hurts. Can he get the job done? How do they fare up against the Kansas City Chiefs, who earned their way here in their own right? 2 number 1 seeds are playing for Super Bowl 57 here in Phoenix, Arizona. Ryan, your pick. Let's go to you first. Who do you think wins this football game?
Man, this one's going to pain me a little bit, Joe, because I'm right outside of Philadelphia, and I dislike the Eagles. I do. I'll put that in the universe. I'm not an Eagles fan. I'm not. My wife is. Her fam, cool, whatever. I will be rooting for the Chiefs. I am under the I think that the game's going to go 2 ways. One, if it's a close game, give me Pat Mahomes to win the football game if it's a close game. But I also think there's a real situation where the Eagles could run away with this one a little bit. It could end up being 31-20 or something like that, where it's not really ever that close. I have to pick the Eagles just because I look at those rosters and I just say the Eagles are just a better roster than Kansas City is, man.
Mm-hmm.
Kansas City is significantly better at the position that matters most, which is why if it's a close game, I think that the quarterback wins it out. But ultimately, I just think the Eagles have a better roster. Top to bottom, they're just a really good football team. They really are.
Absolutely. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, this is really one of those games where you go back and forth as the 2 weeks come by, right? It's like one day you're this, one day you're that, and it's just this seesaw effect back and forth, which is just amazing too, and that's why football is so fun. This is a great matchup for multiple reasons. One, I am extremely happy for Jalen Hurts and just his career and how the fact that he is just like that perfect piece to make this Eagles team what it is, right? To give it its true identity at that quarterback position. It's also a little bit of they got a lot of veterans on their football team too, and they need to take advantage of winning the Super Bowl now because there's a handful of players on their team that are probably going to retire here in the next 2 or 3 years for sure. And if they get the Super Bowl win, they'll definitely retire prematurely, right? But it's kind of like that flash in the pan. It's perfect timing for Jalen Hurts. He's just got the right amount of players around him that are veterans, that are leaders, with his leadership's tacked on top of it. It's just a perfect situation for the Eagles. I think about this game similar to Ryan. If Kansas City can just survive the first quarter and the half without just getting run over, then I actually want to give it an advantage to the Chiefs as the game settles in a little bit more. But this is the key thing. I mean, everyone talks about the 49ers and the Eagles matchup a week ago and how that was so unfortunate. No, it wasn't unfortunate. The Eagles literally just spanked them physically, and they knocked out their quarterback in the game. Yeah. So in this situation, I get very nervous. Patrick Mahomes go down because he gets rocked by Hassan Riddick or an Ndamukong Suh the same way that Brock Purdy did and Josh Johnson did, Chad Henne isn't coming in and being the hero against the Philadelphia Eagles this time around. So Chris Jones have to play through the roof defensively. Frank Clark have to play through the roof defensively, create just monumental moment changes early in this game as much as they can to stop the run game, to make Jalen Hurts make a mistake in the pass game somehow affecting that RPO game. That'll be really the game to me, is those first quarter and a half to see, can they survive it? Because all being said, the 49ers survived. That game is 14-7 at halftime with Brock Purdy getting hurt until they try to go for the 2-minute drill with Josh Johnson, and then he fumbles. So 14-7 at half after everything that happened in that game, much closer than you think, right? As far as the end result of the game. Now, the question is just, can the Chiefs handle, right, the depth of the Eagles as the game continues to go on? But I do want to say I am leaning towards the Chiefs myself in a weird way, just because I don't think that history will repeat itself with the Chiefs-Bucks matchup, where it was the same way. The Bucks roster was so much better than the Chiefs roster as far as depth and physicality. I think that this time around, I think the Chiefs have a little bit more counter moves to make sure that they stay in the game as long as they possibly can.
There you have it, folks.
Nope,
Thanks for tuning into the first team. At Joe DeLeone, at Sims Complete QB, at Rise and Draft. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the Super Bowl this week. We'll be back with more next week.
Toodles.